I had meant to stay past December. The plan was simple: pack up, leave the old house before the snow swallowed the road again, and never look back. But somehow, January found me still here, standing on the sagging porch of my grandmother's cottage, watching the river ice split like cracked glass. You see, someone had promised they'd return before the first frost. That promise had come with a smile I couldn't forget and a ring that still gleamed on my finger, though the metal had begun to chill me at night. I told myself I stayed to honor that promise. But that's not the whole truth. The house itself didn't want me to leave. When I tried, on the last clear morning of the year, I found the front door swollen shut. The windows had frosted from the inside. Even the path to the road had vanished overnight, replaced by a smooth, unbroken field of snow. So I waited. And as winter began to rot into early thaw, something began to stir beneath the ice of the river. At first, I thought it was the current breaking free, but then I heard a knock. 3 slow, hollow taps from under the frozen surface. That was the morning I knew. The thing I'd been waiting for was not what I remembered, that I didn't move for a long time. The sound was faint, deliberate, 3 knocks, then silence. The wind hissed across the field, and I almost convinced myself it was nothing. Almost. But then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. I stepped closer to the river, boots sinking into slush. The ice had started to thaw in places, its surface a patchwork of pale blue and shadow. I could see the current moving lazily beneath it, dark, slow, secretive. Something glimmered down there. A shape. No, more like a shimmer, as though the water itself were breathing light. I crouched, squinting. The sunlight caught it just right, and oh, I wish it hadn't, revealed a pale face staring up from under the ice. I stumbled backward, my breath snagging. The face didn't move, but the eyes, those eyes, seemed to follow me. They were open, impossibly clear, and familiar. Then the knocking started again, louder this time, rattling through the ice and into my bones. Not yet, I whispered to no one. Not you. But the river had other ideas. The surface cracked, a long, shivering fracture racing toward my boots. I turned and ran, snow spraying around me. But just as I reached the porch, a voice, soft and wet and behind me, whispered, "You waited, didn't you?" I froze mid-step. The voice had been so close I felt the mist of its breath graze my neck. I waited. It whispered again, this time from the left, then from the right, like sound had lost its sense of direction. Slowly I turned. The river was still, the cracks closing as if they'd never been there. The face was gone. Only my reflection stared back from the water. Pale, trembling, ring glinting coldly on my finger. Then, something impossible happened. My reflection smiled. Not the nervous, frightened grimace I wore, but a slow, knowing smile that didn't belong to me. And as it did, my breath fogged the air in front of me, spelling a single word on the misted air of my own exhale. Evelyn. My name. Spoken without sound. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of lilac, the same perfume my fiancé had given me the day he vanished last autumn. I spun around, searching the barren field, the frost-scarred trees, the empty path leading nowhere. And there he stood, or something wearing his shape. He was too still. His skin was too pale. His eyes, those once kind hazel eyes, were darker now, like something ancient was peering through them. "You kept your promise," he said softly. "Now it's my turn." And before I could speak, before I could run, he stepped forward, onto the porch, leaving no footprints in the snow. He stood at the foot of the porch, smiling that same half-familiar, half-terrifying smile. My throat went dry. "Daniel?" I managed, though my voice came out as a cracked whisper. "You, how?" He tilted his head, a gesture so perfectly him that my heart stuttered with hope. But then, as the wind shifted, I noticed something strange. The rising dawn stretched the trees' shadows long across the snow, but not his. There was no shadow where he stood. "You waited longer than I thought you would," he said, stepping closer. The boards beneath his feet didn't creak. The air around him was still, untouched by cold. I backed up against the door. "You disappeared," I said. "They searched for weeks," they said. "I know what they said," he cut in gently, as if soothing a child. "That I drowned. That the river took me. But it didn't. It showed me." The words crawled through the air, slow and deliberate. "The river remembers, Evelyn," he murmured. "It never forgets what belongs to it." He reached toward me then, fingers pale as moonlight. I wanted to scream, to flee, but his voice, held me still. "Come see," he whispered. "It's beautiful down there." And just before his hand brushed mine, I saw it. The skin of his palm shimmered like water. Beneath it, faintly, shapes moved. Faces. Pressing outward. Not all of them were strangers. I stumbled backward, heart hammering against my ribs. The porch rail caught me, splintering under my grip. "Daniel, what is that?" I gasped. He looked down at his hand, as though noticing it for the first time. The faces shifted beneath the watery skin, mouths opening and closing in silent screams. One face, pale and soft, pressed to the surface. An old woman's. My grandmother. I choked on the air. "No." Daniel's expression didn't change. "She waited too," he said softly. "They all did. Everyone who listens long enough to the river hears it call their name." I turned and shoved open the cottage door, slamming it behind me. The wood quivered in the wind, the lock half rusted but holding for now. Inside, the house was colder than it should have been. The fire I'd left burning was gone, leaving only a hollow hearth of gray ash. My breath fogged the air. On the wall above the mantel, my grandmother's portrait had changed. Her painted eyes, once calm and kind, now stared wide, terrified, and her mouth hung open mid-scream. Outside, I heard him, knocking again. 3 times. Just like the sound beneath the ice. Then a pause. Then a voice, not his this time, but hers. "Let him in, Evelyn." The whisper came from inside the house. I turned slowly toward the darkened hallway, where the sound of dripping water echoed softly, steadily. Drip, drip, drip. And somewhere in the shadows, something began to move. The sound of dripping grew louder. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop hit the wooden floor with a soft, deliberate rhythm, like footsteps that hadn't yet decided to announce themselves. I pressed my back against the cold wall, eyes fixed on the black mouth of the hallway. The faint morning light from the windows stretched only a few feet before being swallowed whole by the dark. Something moved. A shape tall, human, but wrong in the way fog looks wrong when it moves against the wind. "Daniel?" I whispered, though I already knew it wasn't him. No answer. Only the creak of the floorboards, slow and careful, as if it didn't want to startle me before it got closer. I felt along the wall for the candle I kept on the shelf, fingers shaking. When the wick finally caught with a faint whoosh, the flame flickered and froze. The air was too still. Then I saw it. Wet footprints on the floor, leading from the door, straight into the hallway. Each one shimmered faintly, reflecting faces just beneath the surface of the water. Faces that looked like they were trapped under glass. I followed them with trembling eyes, up to the thing standing at the end of the corridor. It had Daniel's outline, his shoulders, his stance. But its face was sliding, melting, rippling like something reflected in a disturbed pond. And when it spoke, I heard not one voice, but many. "All of us waited, Evelyn." The candle went out. The candle's flame died with a wet hiss, like something had swallowed it. I was blind. Utterly, suffocatingly blind. The air in the hallway thickened, heavy with damp. I could feel the dark pressing close, breathing against my skin. Something brushed my shoulder, cold and slick, like a hand made of river water. I bit back a scream. "Daniel, please?" A whisper came from the blackness, low and fractured, like a chorus speaking through broken throats. "He's still here somewhere inside." The house groaned. A board creaked behind me, then another, soft, circling steps. My pulse thundered in my ears. I stumbled backward until my hand found the doorknob to the cellar. My grandmother had always warned me never to open it. "Not below," she used to say. not where the river seeps in. But it was the only place left to go. I flung it open and slipped down the stairs, closing the door above me just as something heavy struck it from the other side. Once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. I lit another match with trembling fingers. The flames sputtered weakly, casting light over the cellar walls. And that's when I saw it. The river. It wasn't outside anymore. It was in here. A thin sheet of water flowed along the stone floor, rippling as though breathing. And floating just beneath its surface was a small, half-dissolved photograph, Daniel and me, standing by the river last autumn, smiling. But behind us, in that photo, where no one should have been, stood the faint outline of my grandmother. Smiling, too. The match burned low, trembling between my fingers. For a heartbeat, I couldn't look away from that photograph, the faint, ghostly smile of my grandmother behind us. She'd been dead 2 years when that picture was taken. The match singed my fingertips. I dropped it into the water with a hiss. Darkness returned, but not silence. A faint current whispered through the cellar. The river was moving faster now, circling the stone floor like it was hunting for something or someone. I crouched and ran my hand along the damp wall, searching for the old trapdoor that led to the crawlspace. My grandmother used to store preserves down there. She'd always kept it locked. But my fingers found the latch. It was open. Something wanted me to go down. I hesitated. Then, faintly, I heard her voice. "Don't be afraid of the water, Evie. It only takes what it's owed." The air grew colder, thick with the smell of wet earth and lilac. My grandmother's perfume. I lifted the trapdoor. Beneath it, the crawlspace was flooded halfway up. The water gleamed faintly in the dark, and deep below, something moved, something vast and slow. Then, rising from that black shimmer, a figure began to take shape. Not Daniel this time. Smaller. Frilier. My grandmother. She looked just as she had the day she died, same gray hair pinned neatly, same soft cardigan. But her eyes glowed faintly, like reflections of moonlight rippling in deep water. "Evie," she whispered, "you've waited long enough. It's your turn now." And from the water behind her, dozens of pale hands began to reach upward. I slammed the trapdoor shut. The sound of wet hands slapping the underside echoed through the cellar, soft, eager, desperate. "Not yet," I whispered, backing up toward the stairs. My breath came out in clouds, my fingers numb. The water on the floor rose an inch, then another, creeping toward my boots as if it had decided to follow. I turned and fled. Up the cellar stairs, through the narrow kitchen, into the parlor where the fire had long since died. I didn't stop until I reached the second-floor landing, clutching the banister like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to the living. The old hallway smelled of dust and lilac. Again. That scent haunted every room of this house. And then I remembered my grandmother's locked room at the end of the hall. The one she forbade anyone to enter. If she'd brought the river here, maybe the truth was inside. The door was swollen shut, but I threw my shoulder against it until it burst open with a groan. A gust of stale air met me, cold and damp. Inside, the walls were covered in faded photographs, dozens of them. Me, Daniel, neighbors, strangers. All standing by the same river at different points in time. Some of the faces I recognized from missing persons posters I'd seen around the village. And in every photograph, my grandmother stood somewhere in the background, smiling. On her desk sat a leather-bound book, bloated with moisture. I opened it. The pages were filled with names, dates, and pressed flowers that had rotted black. Beside my name, Evelyn Moore, October 14th, was a single line in her delicate handwriting. "The river keeps what the heart won't let go." Something thumped behind me. Once. Then twice. I turned. Water was seeping under the door. And above the rising hiss, I heard Daniel's voice. "Evelyn, come downstairs. She's waiting for us." The water slid beneath the door like a living thing, curling around my shoes and creeping higher. I backed toward the window, my pulse hammering. Outside, the river had risen, flooded over its banks and into the yard. It shimmered in the moonlight, black and endless, swallowing fences, trees, even the road out. There was nowhere left to run. Evelyn. His voice came again, closer now, Daniel's, but softer, wetter. The sound of a throat that had forgotten how to speak air. And behind it, layered faintly beneath, my grandmother's lullaby. Sleep now, my darling. The water is kind. The house groaned, the walls warping as if the beams themselves were breathing. Drops fell from the ceiling. The river wasn't just seeping in, it was filling the house from the inside. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a brass candlestick, and swung it at the door. It burst open in a wave of icy water that knocked me flat. I tumbled into the hallway, choking, dragging myself toward the stairs. Halfway down, I froze. They were waiting. Daniel stood at the bottom of the staircase, water lapping at his knees, his skin rippling faintly as if a tide moved beneath it. My grandmother stood beside him, serene, her cardigan floating gently in the current. Both smiling. "Don't fight it, Evie," she said kindly. "The river only wants to remember you." Daniel reached out a hand. His fingers glimmered, transparent. "You waited just like I asked. It's time to come home." Behind them, the front door burst open, and the river poured in, roaring like laughter. There was nowhere left to go but down. I took one last breath before the water claimed me. Cold slammed into my lungs, shocking, burning, and then the world went soundless. My body sank through the dark like a stone, the current wrapping me in its slow, deliberate pull. At first, I thought I was dying. Then, I opened my eyes. There was light down here. Dim, greenish, flickering through water thick as glass. Shapes moved all around me, slow silhouettes walking, not swimming. The riverbed was a floor of smooth stone, and the current carried whispers instead of sound. Daniel stood a few paces ahead, utterly still, his hair drifting like weed in the current. He smiled when he saw me. "You made it," he said, though his mouth didn't move. His voice filled the water around me, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. I wanted to swim to him, to ask what this place was, but my feet touched solid ground. I wasn't sinking anymore. I was standing, beneath the river. The faces I'd seen beneath his skin now surrounded us, hundreds of them. Men, women, children. Each one pale and glowing faintly, their expressions calm, almost reverent. Some I recognized from the photos upstairs. And there, at the center of them all, stood my grandmother. "Welcome home, Evie," she said, her voice soft as silt. "You see now, don't you? The river doesn't take. It keeps. It remembers everything we ever loved." I turned in a slow circle. Behind her, the drowned forms of houses, trees, even the outline of a bell tower shimmered in the distance, an entire village sleeping under the surface. "Why me?" I whispered. My grandmother smiled sadly. "Because you waited." And then she raised her hand, and the water around us began to stir, pulling tighter, like the river itself was breathing in. The water drew in a long, silent breath, everything stilling. Even Daniel froze, his eyes wide, as though he, too, feared what came next. Then, the river exhaled. Light burst through the dark, rippling like lightning under glass. Around me, the faces began to move, not just drift, but live. Their mouths opened, their eyes blinked, and the drowned world came awake. The bell tower told a deep, muted sound that rippled through the water. Houses flickered with ghostly lanterns. Shadows crossed behind half-dissolved windows. The long-dead village had returned for me. "Evelyn," my grandmother said gently, "this is what we become. The river remembers our joy, our grief, our promises, and binds them so they can never fade." I turned toward Daniel. "You wanted me here," I said, voice trembling through bubbles. "Why?" His eyes glimmered with sorrow. "Because I couldn't bear to remember you alone." The words hit harder than the current itself. Around us, images shimmered in the water. Our first meeting, our laughter, the promise at the riverbank before he disappeared. But as the scenes played out, they bled. My memories weren't memories anymore. They were alive, and the river was feeding on them. Every heartbeat I stayed, more of me seemed to dissolve. My skin glowed faintly, my hands turning translucent. "Don't fight it," my grandmother whispered. "To stay remembered is better than to fade." But deep inside, something rebelled. This wasn't memory. It was a cage. And somewhere above, faint and distorted, I heard a new sound cutting through the current. A knocking. 3 times. Coming from above the surface. Someone was at the house. Knock, knock, knock. The sound shuddered through both worlds, the drowned one below and the quiet, half-flooded house above. Somewhere far above the river's glow, the old cottage waited, half-submerged in gray morning light. The flood had receded just enough for the front porch to show again. Mist clung to the eaves like breath that hadn't yet dispersed. A man stood at the door. He was young, maybe 25, with a weathered satchel and a camera hanging from his neck. A reporter, perhaps, or a historian. His truck was parked crooked on the overgrown road behind him, its tires sunk halfway in mud. He'd come looking for stories about the vanished village of Wexford Hollow, the one the river had supposedly swallowed decades ago. "Hello," he called, knocking again. The sound echoed oddly, too deep, as if the house were hollow all the way through. The door creaked open by itself. Inside, everything was still. Water dripped somewhere deep within, steady and patient. The air smelled faintly of lilac. The man stepped inside, clicking on a flashlight. The beam cut through dust and floating motes. Every surface bore the mark of damp. The walls bubbled with water stains, and the photographs on the mantel had melted into smears. But one photo remained clear. A young woman, Evelyn, standing beside a man by the river. The reporter frowned, brushing it off. There was something strange about the water damage. The edges weren't blurred. They were flowing. Then, faintly, from the direction of the cellar, he heard a voice. "Please help me." He froze. "Hello," he called again, stepping closer. The voice came once more, wet, muffled, urgent. "Please, the river remembers, but I don't want it to." The cellar door quivered. Water seeped up through the cracks, whispering against the boards. And somewhere far below, Evelyn heard him, and turned her face toward the surface for the first time. The reporter hesitated at the cellar door, hand hovering over the latch. The voice had gone quiet, but the air still thrummed with that faint, liquid hum, like the heartbeat of the river itself was pulsing just beneath the floorboards. He leaned closer. "Hello? Can you hear me?" A whisper rose through the crack in the wood, soft, urgent, unmistakably human. "Please open it. I can't stay." He swallowed hard and pulled the latch. The door yawned open, releasing a breath of cold, damp air that smelled of silt and decay. A faint shimmer of light moved beneath the surface of the water below, flickering like candlelight. He raised his flashlight. What the hell? The beam struck the water, and the reflection looked back at him. A woman's face, pale and wavering, lips moving though no sound came. Evelyn. Down below, she saw him through the trembling barrier between their worlds. His light was a blade cutting into the river's gloom, and for the first time since she'd been taken, she felt heat. "Please," she mouthed, pressing her palm against the unseen divide. The river shuddered around her. The other faces, Daniel, her grandmother, the hundreds of drowned souls, turned toward the glow, their serenity cracking into something like fear. "Don't," her grandmother's voice echoed through the current. "He'll unmake what we are." The reporter crouched, fascinated and terrified. He reached down, fingertips brushing the surface. And the moment he touched it, the cellar flooded with light. Water exploded upward, dragging him down, even as Evelyn surged toward him. For a heartbeat, their hands met, warm skin to cold water. Then everything inverted. The house above collapsed inward, vanishing beneath the surge, and when silence returned, the river ran smooth again. No house, no trace. Only the faint echo of a single voice carried on the mist. I waited, even after winter. Spring came late that year. The villagers said it was because the river had taken too much: houses, land, people. It needed time to settle. When the floods receded, all that remained of my grandmother's cottage was a small, still pond where the road curved away into the woods. It was round and quiet, rimmed with reeds, so calm it reflected the sky perfectly. Too perfectly. They say water forgets, that time smooths away tragedy. But those who live near the pond whisper otherwise. Sometimes, on gray mornings, the surface ripples when there's no wind. A face drifts up for just a second, faint, uncertain, as if caught between waking and dreaming. A woman's face.
Mine.
And on colder nights, when frost forms like lace across the ground, travelers swear they hear it, the soft sound of 3 knocks coming from beneath the ice. The locals have built a small sign near the bank now, warning visitors not to get too close. Danger. Unstable ground. No trespassing. But people still stop. They always do. Some take photos. Some linger. And every few years one simply vanishes, camera, boots and all. Those who've seen the ripples say the pond remembers each of them, the way it remembered me. Because the river never forgets its promises. And it always waits. Even after winter.